Thanks so much, everybody. Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri. The hottest ticket in town right now is Aaron Sorkin's theatrical retelling of Harper Lee's classic To Kill a Mockingbird. In this classic tale, a group of children are exposed to the harsh realities of racial prejudice in America when their father defends an African-American man accused of assaulting a white woman. The play casts 3 adult actors as the young narrators, and we have 2 of them here. Please say hello to Gideon Glick, who plays Dill, and Celia Keenan-Bolger, who plays the iconic Scout. Give it up, everybody.
Hi, guys. Hi, Celia.
Thank you so much for being here.
Our pleasure.
Congratulations. This is amazing. One, it was an event before it even premiered. Everybody, when it was announced that this was happening, everybody freaked out. It's a huge undertaking. 2, the play's great. 3, for this person, you guys are my favorite part of the show, and you can take that to Jeff Daniels if you want to.
He's definitely watching right now.
Yeah. Hey, Jeff, act like more like a little kid on the play. No, you guys are tasked with the duty of acting like children and narrating the entire show. The weight of the show is on your shoulders. What was that like when you first started rehearsing that, when you first were told that that was going to be the case? What was your audition like? Let's go back to that.
Well, it's interesting because the call that I got from my agent was like, so I have a sort of weird request. Aaron Sorkin has written this treatment. He's like done the first draft of To Kill a Mockingbird that's coming in. Obviously, they will have children play these parts, but he needs to work on the script, so he needs to hear it out loud. Would you come and just read the part so that he can work on the script? And I was like, yeah, right. Who's Aaron Sorkin? I'm like, But I was like, I would be thrilled. And also, like, to get to do something where there are, like, no stakes, I was like, well, if they're using kids, then I don't even have to, like, worry about it. So I showed up, and I was super excited. And, like, when it was announced, I was like, what little 8-year-old is going to get to play that part? I'm so jealous of her. So they called. So I stole that part out from under an 8-year-old's nose. But basically...
Did you show up to auditions pretending you were somebody else? Like, Celia,
like,
come on, we know.
You can't be here. You can't be here. But, you know, I, like, showed up that day, read the play. I was like... good luck to the 8-year-old who can navigate Aaron Sorkin's sentences, because this guy was like, what? How does this? Because, you know, it's dense. And then, like, halfway through the day, they were like, maybe this would work.
Halfway through the day?
Yes. That they were like, maybe we could do this with adults.
Gideon, were you there at this as well?
I was not. So Will Pullen, who plays Jem, and Celia did a reading of it, or 2 readings of it. And then I was brought in for a 3-week workshop where it was finally put on its feet. And
this was at this point they had decided that it was going to be adults.
Yes, and Celia and Will were already cast, and so about a week and a half into it, they offered me the part.
Wow.
And like the difference between sort of sitting around a table and playing a kid and being like, I can like sound like a kid sometimes and sound like a grown-up sometimes. I was like, that seems okay. But then once Gideon joined and we were doing the workshop, and they were like, okay, let's get up on our feet. And I was like, I'd rather be dead.
So wait, my going back to that first reading, halfway through the day, they had said basically maybe it should be adults. Did they also say, would you be willing to play the child, or was that like a longer decision that came
They
back
were
to
like,
you later?
basically we finished the reading, and then Scott Rudin emailed me and was like, you want to play Scout on Broadway? And I was like, yes, I do.
That's
so
incredible.
It was.
I mean, that's not the usual way that it goes.
No, and also I feel like you jump through so many hoops trying to like get jobs, and auditioning is such a crazy thing anyway, because you're like, I'm not showing
this job. This job is
Yes.
probably like if it had been put out into the marketplace somehow that Aaron Sorkin was casting 3 people to play the children from To Kill a Mockingbird, everyone would be calling their agent and being like, I can do that. Get me an audition. Do this. Do that.
yeah, it's very humane, and I actually think Scott does it often when he's developing new pieces. And I'll say I think about 95% of our cast was cast through these readings and workshops, so they didn't really have an audition process.
which also is so nice, because when you're working on the show, then you know, even from that first reading, like we did it and then we went away and they were like, we're going to do another one, you know, in 2 months. And even if we like didn't have the script, it wasn't like we were able to like bring it home and post it to Twitter or anything. Like Aaron Sorkin's got a great new play coming out, but that we
And I'm fired.
right, and now I've been let go. I like got the job and now I'm let go. But that you do start to just think like your brain is still processing things where you're like, what was that scene? Like, what was that moment? Like, how can I figure it out? And like we worked on the play for almost a year.
Yeah. We did two 3-week workshops. So there was 6 weeks of rehearsal where we basically mounted the whole thing.
Yeah. And then you in between that time and when we actually started rehearsals, like your brain is still trying to metabolize like what you can be doing and how it can be a little bit fuller. I think it's like
It's an ongoing process. I think the show will end and we will stop doing the show and we will still be thinking about
Totally.
how to do it better and how to absorb it in a different way.
Is that the case with most shows, or do you think that has to do with the parts that you're specifically playing?
I think the writing in this play I think with great plays, this happens where you're like, oh, I thought I understood this.
Right.
And then 100 performances in, you're like, what was I doing? I understand this in such a different way than I did before. And I think the writing in this is so good. And the sort of, like the music of the language is so sort of complex and the way that I even like say the lines, I'm like, oh, I just understand what this line is better. And so I'm able to communicate it a little bit better. And I think that just has to do with how good the writer is.
How much had the script changed from that first reading and those first workshops to what is on the stage now? I like asking questions like this, and I don't know, maybe Aaron Sorkin doesn't like them to be answered. I don't know. But I think it's really important, especially with someone like him, because he is known as a visionary and such a completist. But for those who are struggling writers or working writers, they should know that, like, no, it's still a process for him where he's figuring it out in the beginning and rewriting and working with people and needs to hear it.
Yeah, but before I think the script ever even got to us, he actually did kind of like a greatest hits version of To Kill a Mockingbird, where he did all the favorite scenes and tried to be very, very exacting with his adaptation. And then Scott said to him, "No, this is not it. So go back." And then he ripped it apart. And that's why the courtroom is the centerpiece and why it's kind of told in this fragmented way. And then from when it came to us, it evolved through conversations and it evolved through having really, really an incredible company of actors and talking about the piece and dissecting the piece. And then even in our preview process, we cut like, I think 20 minutes off the show, which is a lot.
And what's crazy to me is that very first reading that we did in like 2017, I was like, this is a perfect play. And I think he did 40 drafts from that initial reading to opening night. And the way and I think what's incredible is that first draft was really good that we got, but he was able, I think what's so hard about writing, especially when you've been with it for a long time, is like, what stays and what goes, and where do things need to be expanded, and where do we understand, you can just leave it alone. And his ability to just like keep zooming out and understanding the best way to tell the story. And I think also it's true, like it was a very collaborative process. And I think Scott Rudin was a big part of that. I think Bart Sher was a big part of it. And I think the cast ended up saying like, maybe we don't need all this, or maybe we could use a little more over here.
Like a different perspective. When you first got involved, I mean, one of the major changes of the play, well, one is that, you're flipping back and forth between the courtroom scene and some of the early parts of the book where normally in the book, the trial doesn't really start till 150 pages in, but also the expansion of certain characters. The maid, Calpurnia, is a completely different voice in this show. She adds a much more, I would say, relevant take to the entire proceedings, as well as Benga Aknabi's character,
Tom Robinson.
Tom Robbins is given a much more to do as well than the book, or I think in the original movie. Was that a part of the original script as well that you guys sat down with, or was that something that came?
It always was. I mean, I think he felt like you cannot make a play about race in 2019 where the characters of color have no agency.
It's only white people talking about it.
That are like
only what they've learned.
Right, exactly. Right. And the truth is, I think the book and the movie were right for their times, and were probably very forward thinking. But that to put those on stage now, it would be problematic, and that one of the things he talks about the most was that we cannot have Atticus Finch as this white savior who comes in and like helps out the black community in Macomb, Alabama.
Oh no, he's wrong at certain points in the play, which is really it's my favorite moments of the play in a lot of ways, with the exception of your performances, is the moments where he's really confronted by Calpurnia, and he has to sort of confront the idea that sometimes civility itself is a privilege that is only afforded to those who are not a marginalized voice.
Yeah, I mean, he's a fallible character, and Calpurnia becomes the conscience of the show, and she challenges these notions that we've loved about the book in terms of walking around in another man's skin, and when he, because I believe in being respectful, and she goes, no matter who you're disrespecting by doing it, and it's chilling, and it's incredible. The book was the 60s looking back on the 30s, and we're now 2019 looking back on the 60s looking back on the 30s. And it's fascinating. So you're watching it with these layers. And Aaron, I think, has done a really, really good job of shifting it on its axis.
And that Harper Lee was able to make something in 1960 that can really withstand all of this time, because Aaron hasn't, there's nothing new. Like, all of the themes that he has sort of teased out and tried to make, even more apparent in our show were there at the beginning. I think it's just an amazing combination of this source material and then having a writer who understood how to make it relevant.
Now, we're talking about the show itself in depth and working with Aaron Sorkin in the script, but what I really want to talk to you guys about is playing children. The first time you had to wear oversized children's clothes and stomp around and speak like a child, how did you get comfortable doing that? Are you comfortable doing it yet?
I mean, it's still somewhat daunting. I'll say this is the first role where I've been predominantly scared and nervous, and it happens more often. And you would think 100 and so performances in, obviously it's gotten easier, but it's scary. You're very vulnerable. But I'll say the whole process of creating these kids it's never been about the external. It's never been about the way they stomp, the way they use their voice. It's always been about the stakes of the character. What motivates them? What is this setting? We're in 1930s Alabama. There's no television. What excites them and ignites them and makes them do the things they do? And then everything follows suit. And so thus you have a groundwork that's grounded in what's going on between the characters. And so you're not just being a child.
And that it's thank goodness, a gradual process. Like, even from that first reading where I was like, oh, I think this is what Scout sounds like when she's younger, and this is more what she sounds like when she's narrating. So you have like that first layer, and then you're doing like the second layer of getting up on your feet, and exactly what Gideon was saying about what do kids do. And there's an amazing interview with Harper Lee where she just talked about, she was saying she's like, we're storytellers in the South. Like, if you have nothing to do all day, telling stories is a huge part of the culture, and people come and sit on the porch and gossip or make up stories or pass on stories from their, families to keep themselves interested. And I think as kids, that she would say, we would just like hang out in the backyard and run around like crazy. And so then that sparks the imagination, which is less about like, how do kids walk or act, but like what kind of stories would be compelling to them in a hot summer in Alabama in 1934.
Is it also not just how kids walk and act, but how these kids walk and act?
Oh yeah. I found I started mimicking a little bit of Atticus's physical behavior, because Dill, for instance, kind of thinks of himself as maybe the teacher and the philosopher of the three, and this kind of grandiose character who has some form of authority. So thus, he's emulating authority.
Well, he's also looks up to Atticus in a way that
Deeply.
Atticus's own children don't, even because Dill doesn't have a parental figure in his life, really.
This is the father he's been looking for.
Yeah.
I think also because our characters are based on Harper Lee and Truman Capote, these two I think their gender, particularly when they were growing up, was like the fact that these two lived next door to each other in Monroeville, Alabama. Like, what are the chances that two of our great American authors, like one who is gay, one who there's no, I mean, I do think she was a lesbian. You heard it here.
I've never full on said it.
Me
I always said
neither.
a tomboy.
But you know, that these two kids were like such outliers in their community, but they had each other. Like what that looks like to be, even if we want to say queer, like growing up in Monroeville, Alabama, like that also influences the way that these particular kids move through the world. And I think that was like such a gift to have reference points for who these little people were based on.
Did you often think of your characters as Truman and Harper in a lot of ways?
Yeah, I did a lot of research on Capote. I read a lot of his work. It's informed a gigantic part of him, part of who Dill is, because Dill's a courageous guy, and so is Truman Capote. I mean, he was out writing queer novels in 1948, which is just baffling to me. And here you have a young queer boy in the deep South, and that it just ignited the character for me because he's courageous.
He's brazen, yeah. He's brazen in a great way. He's courageous and brazen, yeah. In some ways, he's sort of throwing it in everybody's face that he's smarter and he's different.
Absolutely, it's almost it's a defense mechanism. Right. It's a way to ingratiate himself, but it's also being like, this is me. You can't put me anywhere else but the way I'm presenting it.
Whereas Scout is kind of taking in the world.
Right, but I do think I think both in Harper Lee's, I would like to believe that her exposure to Truman and Scout Finch's exposure to Dill is like, oh, being other can be okay because there will be others who are the other, that you're not just alone in your otherness. And like that can manifest in all kinds of different ways, but that there is something that I think they see each other. And that's a beautiful thing to experience as a kid or a grown up.
Yeah. And how has it been working with Jeff Daniels as Atticus, I have to ask?
I mean, that guy is like a real theater pro. I think his work ethic, we would all be like, where are we going to lunch today? Jeff's like in the corner with the script. And I was like, it doesn't seem that fun over there. Because he is just working really, really hard. And to be with somebody, especially...
No, is that like what's actually there in the script?
It's actually a game,
like
and there's
the
the
Detroit
icon in there, and
Tigers.
he's watching a sports game.
Right. But, I think there are a lot of people who end up on Broadway who have never worked on stage before. They're movie stars, and, that can go any number of different ways. But he is somebody who cares about the theater, who believes in the theater, who is trained in the theater.
He has his own theater company. He directs it in Michigan. I mean, the theater is important to him. And the fact that he signed on for a year is a really, really big deal.
He signed on for a year.
A year.
What is the normal contract?
Like 3 months.
3 to 6 months
Yeah.
max, yeah. And for a celebrity, I've never heard of a year.
Yeah.
Wow, that's unreal. And working with Sorkin, he's notorious for being very precious is not the right word, but they're his words. He cares very deeply about his words. What is that collaboration like?
It's funny. I feel like we did not get crazy, like you're not saying it right. We just had an experience. We just went to D.C. Nancy Pelosi hosted us, and we did like scenes from the play at the Library of Congress for D.C. school kids, and they like gave us a script. And I was going through and I was like, oh,
that's
shit.
not how I say
I
it.
have not been saying that line right. And Sorkin never called me out on it, which was something that like I had heard leading up to this. Like, and of course you were like, don't say the wrong lines if it's Aaron Sorkin's writing. But somehow along the way, like with rewrites, I had like, inverted some things. So in that way, I think he was a real collaborator. And I think in the same way as Jeff, like, he loves the theater and like studied musical theater, right? When he was in college.
Aaron studied musical theater
Yes.
at Syracuse. Oh, that's what you're saying. Yeah, at Syracuse.
And so he also is, theater is a really, really collaborative sport. And there's like that great quote where he's like, I like team sports more than I like individual sports. And like this, it felt like he really was, it wasn't just Aaron Sorkin and then we all did everything else and he would come in and...
Well, he also had a writing partner, which was Harper Lee. I mean, he married his language to hers as well. So it's it's a collaboration in the largest sense.
It's interesting that you say he studied musical theater at Syracuse because there is a sequence within the show that suddenly feels kind of like a musical number.
Oh, yeah, the whole show feels very much like a musical. To be honest.
that is true. The whole show, especially like as the three of you kind of come out of a scene and start talking. But there is one specifically where like doorways are kind of like brought in and spun around, and like it's just like a passing of time that feels choreographically like a musical number.
He
in
learned
some ways.
orally. I think it was some interview, and he was obsessed with Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf as a kid, and he would listen.
That checks out.
Yeah, he would listen to the record and learn how to write from listening to it. And his writing is very. It feels like sheet music, to be honest, and I respond to it very greatly because you understand his intention musically. You understand how it should go. And he has a very distinct way of hearing it and writing it. And he writes as he speaks, too. If you listen to him speak and then look at his writing, it's there. The pattern, the rhythm. It's pretty extraordinary.
I think you especially hear that in Jeff's performance as well. You hear the Atticus very specifically because he's talking to kids a lot and because he's an authority figure in some ways. He is speaking in a kind of sing-songy way at times.
He definitely has. I watched him a lot in the beginning where I was just like, he's done so much Sorkin that I was like, what? How does he handle all this language? Because also he has a lot to say in certain parts of the play. And
so do you.
Yeah, agreed. It's true. But because I didn't have the same experience that Jeff did, I was always like, how is he navigating this? And it is a certain kind of muscle. And it's funny, like as we were in previews and we would get new material, it is amazing like what the brain is able to do, where it was just like, oh, okay, now my brain like understands how to just like keep putting in Aaron Sorkin. Like I feel like I was like dreaming in Sorkinese for like 6 weeks just because like we were changing things every single night.
I also, I wonder, a lot of times with plays, actors will say, once the play starts, you kind of just get the play itself will carry you through. But this particular play is fragmented and broken up in different ways, and certain scenes, while it's clearly all of a whole and there's nothing wrong with it, but certain scenes feel like, you could move them around a little bit if you wanted to, but we have chosen to put them here. And I wonder if it's a different feeling as an actor, that it doesn't necessarily feel like the play just carries you through and you actually have to process it and think about it while you're doing it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there are times you have an emotional scene that starts, but it actually took place like 5 minutes ago. And it's really hard. I would say I did a play called Significant Other where I never left the stage, and the whole time it was easier, even though it was very demanding.
Well, it's like I talk to people from The Ferryman, and they're like, play just carries you right
get
through.
On the
It's one
ride.
scene.
Yeah, you get on the ride and then you get off of it. But this is so many stop and starts, and the energy that we're bringing to it is not laid back energy. It's child energy,
and just sort of trying to read because different audiences every night require different things, and I feel like there are nights, and because so much of our relationship is with the audience, and to like get them like, and that we are in fact the motor that is moving the play along, to understand like, do you need me to take a little bit more time to like spell out like, okay, and now we're gonna go over here, or are you the kind of audience that is gonna check out because you're already like 2 steps ahead of me, and that we actually have to sort of breeze through this? And like that's something early on I couldn't even think about because I was like, what's my line? But now I'm able to sort of try to read like who they are and what they like, how they are listening to the play.
Onto.
Yeah, totally. And that like some nights we're like, oh, this crowd is like really a Judge and Atticus kind of crowd, which means like kids moving along because they're like, we just don't really have time for you guys. And sometimes by the end, they're like, okay, turns out like we're on board. And then some nights it's like all about the kids, and that, but that's just, different chemistries of 1,400 people in a theater.
The act-
Some might not understand it fully. I mean, I think
That's
we get
we can tell
them,
ourselves a
we
story
don't.
that
Yeah.
The actor who plays the judge is wonderful as well. Forgive me for not remembering his name.
Dakin Matthews.
Yeah, Dakin Matthews, wonderful character actor. He's in
Everything.
Yeah, and when you see him on stage, you're like, that guy, he's in everything.
He was another one who was in that very first reading that we did, and the performance, I was like, that guy is a genius. And essentially the performance that he's giving now, is the performance that he gave, like on day one. He understood that.
He's a master technician, and especially with text. I mean, he's a Shakespeare scholar. He's been a dramaturg for Shakespeare shows. He's been a teacher for people who are like, I think when celebrities come and do Shakespeare, they go to Dakin.
It's so interesting. It's so nice to see him play the sort of dignified, sensitive Southerner who's leading the courtroom, because I think I feel like, and I may be wrong, I've seen Dakin play the sort of
ornery,
like the prosecutor who's
Right,
racist,
totally.
or like the slave owner in some
Yep.
way. Where I feel like I've seen Dakin play that a number of times.
Now we just got to get Fred to do that too.
Yeah, now he gets to be like the good Southerner. We have a question from Twitter. The question is, hey guys, do you guys prepare differently for classic characters as opposed to characters the audience isn't familiar with?
That's a good question. I feel like I'm generally not somebody who's so into research for a character that it just isn't necessarily helpful, particularly on a new piece where you feel like, well, we're just building this like from the ground up. This one, I felt like research, and I mean, I would say this is a classic character, and it's a character that so many people have very strong feelings about, that I was like, you got to know more about Scout Finch and Harper Lee than the audience does, because they already are coming in with some really big feelings about who this little person is. And so on this one, we both went down to Monroeville, Alabama, where Harper and Truman were born, and
I think the setting and also the time period. I think that was something we felt we needed to know like the back of our hands, because that informs everything that is going on, and so that's the most important.
I think we have one question in our audience. Who has a question? They're walking up right behind me as I talk. That's so good. Wow.
Hi, Celia. I've had the pleasure of seeing you actually in Glass Menagerie and Peter and the Starcatcher as well. And it's all these characters. You have kind of a pattern of playing young and young at heart characters. And I was curious if you ever bring the physical and emotional work that you've already done on playing young and bring it into the next time that you play youth.
it's so funny. I think the amazing thing about being an actor for a long time is that you realize like there are vestigial parts of every character you've played that end up on stage with you. It's like why all the best actors are older. I think like a body of work informs everything you do. And so certainly, I don't know that it's even intentional, but there's also, I worked with Bart a really long time ago on The Light in the Piazza, which I like did not end up doing on Broadway, but I remember thinking like so much of what I worked on in that show ended up in the Glass Menagerie. And it can feel like, oh, that went away a long time ago. But when you work on something, I think it can't help but sort of stay with you. And there's also the part of you that's like, I don't want to give a repeat performance. So you're looking outside of yourself to try to figure out like, how is this character different from what I'm sort of innately going to bring? But I think always the things that you've done before end up having an effect on the way that you approach the role.
Did you feel like things that you had done before affected the way that you approached this role as well?
Yeah, I think you carry your body of work and your life experience in everything you do. So the more you do, I think the deeper it gets, and there's more depth, and there's more to cull from. So I do think they're all in dialogue with each other.
Well, guys, I love the show. Congratulations. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having
To
us.
Kill a Mockingbird is currently running at the Schubert Theater on 44th Street. It's incredible. Get a ticket if you still can.
You can.
I think you can. Yeah, you can. Please give Celia and Gideon a huge round of applause for being here. Thank you
Thanks,
so
guys.
much.
Thank you.